it's your human rights as the host community that are going to live in the sacrifice zone of these incinerators to have access to information. And these sorts of forums are the vehicle for you to get this information. And I hope that I'm able to give you something of value tonight. I want to start by saying, though, that as a community, you're not alone. There is an international movement for zero waste and to end incineration. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. So, just a bit about me. I'm from the National Toxics Network. We're also affiliated with the International POPs Elimination Network and the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives. Community engagement, as I said, is critical. It's your basic human right, and that's enshrined in these international conventions. I want to make a comment about definitions, because there's a lot of information I've seen out there about what's really an incinerator and what's really not. Let's put this to bed now. Mass combustion technologies, gasification, pyrolysis and plasma arc are all recognised internationally and classified under the European Union and the US EPA as incineration. And the reason why industry doesn't like to talk about incinerators is because they're deeply unpopular with the public. And as you can see, around the world, people have been opposing incineration. 10,000 people protested in China against one of their world's largest incinerators, in the UK, in France, and in Mexico. Even closer to home for me in Western Australia, where we're facing 5 approved incinerators, none of which have been built yet. You'll also hear that Europe has plenty of incinerators. So does the US and Japan. Look at Japan, they have hundreds of incinerators. And that's true, Japan does have hundreds of incinerators, but they also are contributing 40% of the dioxin emissions globally as a result. They also have the highest levels of dioxin in the bodies of their citizens globally and in their environment. And their environmental health standards are the highest in the world. And you can see here, you probably can't see very well, but the highest graph there is Japan. This is the United Nations Environment Programme's inventory of persistent organic pollutants, and you can see clearly that Japan's a big contributor. The USA at the end there is the next. Incineration, whether it's waste to energy, mass combustion, whatever the technology, they essentially take our waste and turn it into toxic ash and air pollution. For about every 4 tonnes of waste burnt, we're creating 1 tonne of toxic ash, and that ash has to be landfilled. Incinerators destroy the embedded energy in the waste, okay? And that's, when we think about the calorific value of waste that's going into an incinerator, the calorific value is largely in plastics. There's very little calorific value in organics or paper, and the rest of the waste stream is compostable or recyclable. So what you're left with in the residual waste stream, and the residual waste stream is really the only section of the waste stream that incinerators can justify using, and it's predominantly plastic. Plastic is a fossil fuel, so it's essentially burning fossil fuels. Incinerators compared to zero waste strategies like reuse, recycling, composting and all the other upstream and downstream parts of the zero waste strategy, there are far more jobs in that than there are in the incineration industry. You'll hear that these are new incinerator technologies and those are the old bad ones that polluted. But the technologies around incineration have remained largely unchanged. It's the air pollution control equipment that has changed, and it's the largest, most expensive portion of the cost to build an incinerator. And they are the most expensive form of energy production, and they emit more greenhouse gases and mercury per unit of energy than both coal and gas. And you can see here, the US EPA has demonstrated that. And also that they're the most expensive energy comparative to other safer, cleaner, renewable energy sources. This takes scarce funds away from clean, renewable energy, and that's something that we should be avoiding in Australia. So federal bodies like the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and ARENA, They're already giving out millions of dollars to waste-to-energy incinerators when they might be able to say that they're renewable, but they certainly aren't sustainable. And they're certainly not clean energy. So, Dr. Jeffrey Morris, an excellent ecological economist in the US, has demonstrated in his peer-reviewed published papers that there's 3 to 4 more times energy saved through a combination of recycling and reusing than compared to incineration. And we can see here that PET bottles, those bottles you buy your Coke and your Fanta in, we can save 26 times more energy by recycling that than burning it. Incinerators, we've heard 2 great local speakers talk about air pollution and particulates, and you did a fantastic job. And that's just a summary of some of the pollutants there. Do we have a regulatory framework in Australia that will protect your health from air pollution? The awful answer is no. These are the only air quality standards we have. Our air NEPMs were created in 1998, that's nearly 20 years ago, and there's been no change since. It was reviewed in about 2010, and the reason I'm raising this is because the NEPC did a very thorough investigation of our air quality standards, and they found in 2010 that the current ambient air quality levels, and I've only used NOx here, which is nitrous oxide, the current ambient criteria is already causing public health impacts. And there's been no change since. We desperately need improved air quality impacts for protecting public health. And that's because children are the most vulnerable. And for the National Toxics Network, in terms of policy, we'd like to see that the policy driver for setting environmental health standards is based around children, protecting children's environmental health. Because little do people know that it's risk assessment for environmental standards is generally around a 70-kilo male, okay? Children don't process toxins and eliminate pollutants the same way that adults do, and that's because they're developing and growing, they're more vulnerable to pollution. So if you protect children's health, you're protecting the environment better and you're protecting health in general better. And there are many peer-reviewed scientific reports proving this, and this is a recent one. I'm just going to say a little bit about nanoparticles, because nanoparticles are largely unregulated anywhere in the world, and yet they are so pervasive that they... I'll just go straight, sorry, I'm rushing through, there's a lot to tell you. I'm just going to go straight here. A good example, you can see the nanoparticles in the spleen here, okay? And that's because nanoparticles pass straight through the blood-brain barrier, straight into the organs. So breathe them in, straight into the organs, straight into the blood. And there's combustion naturally produces nanoparticles. But our society now creates engineered nanoparticles, and we have no idea what that means when we're burning them, that through products that have come through our material productions processes. They're a global danger, nanoparticles. They travel long distances and they end up in the polar ice caps. They can carry disproportionate amounts of pollutants, and those pollutants get re-released through climate change, through melting polar ice caps. Dioxin. This is a really important part because Australia is signatory to the Stockholm Convention. The Stockholm Convention is designed to protect human health from the adverse impacts of persistent organic pollutants. And incinerators are the second largest generator of dioxins. I have a lot of information here about the health impacts of dioxins, but I don't have a lot of time to tell you, so I'm going to fly through it. But they basically accumulate in the fats of people. They are on the planet forever, they don't go away, and they do harm wherever they come into contact with human health and the environment.
And there's no safe limit for dioxin.
That's right. A lot of fantastic organisations, international organisations, are working on this, and one of them is the International POPs Elimination Network, to which the National Toxics Network is affiliated. And they've written a lot about the global dangers of incinerator ash. And as you can see, this is an incinerator ash landfill in the UK and in the US. So there are, now this ash is so toxic, it's a legacy issue for future generations, and it's not a sustainable way of dealing with our waste, as you can see. And we know that there's plenty of scientific peer-reviewed science demonstrating the dangers of toxic fly ash. These are recent ones too. And as I mentioned, these persistent organic pollutants move to the polar ice caps where they accumulate and get into the bodies of the marine ecosystem, and we eat that fish, we contaminate our own bodies, and these persistent organic pollutants are increasing over time, and so with climate change we're releasing more and more of them. And as, again, we have a lot of peer-reviewed scientific evidence to back up these claims. Europe's touted a lot about having the world's best available technique, incinerators. Zero Waste Europe is a fantastic organisation who's documented the failure of the incinerator industry in Europe and its impacts in terms of air pollution and what that means for the communities that live around them. Another fantastic organisation working on incineration in Europe is Arnica. And I want to show you this because we talk a lot about air pollution, we talk a lot about ash, we talk about lost property values and loss of amenity. What often isn't talked about is the accidents that happen at incinerator sites. And this is a map of incinerator accidents in Europe, and it's an interactive map. You can actually click on these and read about the accidents that have happened there, and you can see that this is very recent, 2016 in a Nordic country, one of Europe's best incinerators catching fire. And I'm just going to scroll through this, and I don't do this to scare you, I do this to motivate you, okay? These are the types of accidents that are happening in incinerators all over Europe and around the world. France, Hungary, France again, Slovakia, Czech Republic, France, Argentina. And as was mentioned, what's happening in terms of policy in relation to waste-to-energy incineration? Well, the EU has recognised that the incineration industry is undermining recycling and composting. So they're taking a policy redirection. So they've passed legislation to require all member countries and states to source separate their organics. Because let's face it, we don't need more carbon in the atmosphere. We need to put that carbon back in the biosphere. So we need to take our organic waste and compost it and put it back in the ground. And so the EU has recognised this and legislated. They've also set very clear directions to countries, those that are heavily dependent on landfills, should be beefing up their source separation and collection with a focus on organics and getting energy from anaerobic digestion rather than incineration. Those countries that are heavily dependent on incineration, they're saying raise your taxes, end the subsidies and the economic incentives, decommission your old incinerators and put a moratorium on new ones. The US. There hasn't been a new waste-to-energy incinerator built in the US since the late 90s. And San Francisco is really a great example, and I'm mentioning this because it's a demographic in a city that's very similar to Sydney or any city in Australia. And they're achieving incredible results by practicing zero waste strategies. And that's about putting all of the energy and the resources at the front end of the waste stream, not at the back end, okay? And they're getting great results. The wonderful Professor Paul Connett. If you want to hear about the success of zero waste and why it's the waste management policy for the future, this is the book that you need to read. And there's a fantastic movie that's narrated and stars Jeremy Irons. So I urge you all to see the movie Trashed. Finally, we need to be moving to a circular economic model. Currently, we've got this linear economic model. And I have to say, it really is a culture of Australia, isn't it? We're a very extractive, mining-based economy and culture. And we have to grow up and move away from that because the planet cannot sustain it, our public health cannot sustain it, and it's a dead end, okay? We can't continue to extract materials, consume them, and waste them. We need to put them back into our system and get the value of those finite resources that really don't belong to our generation, they belong to future generations. If you want to know, I know that I'm talking very fast, I'm really sorry about this, but if you want to know more, you can contact the National Toxics Network. We've written a report, we've got you can access my PowerPoint or any of these other reports. If you'd like to see me or my colleague from NTN, Joe Imig here, we'd be happy to pass on this information. Thank you very much for inviting me, and good luck.